Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gina Gore. You're chairman of the NFRW Election Integrity Committee. Today, we're thrilled to have a very interesting guest joining us for our NFRW Election Integrity Zoom. Joshua McKoon is chairman of the Georgia Republican Party. I met Josh in Milwaukee my first evening there when I went to the convention. We were on the platform committee and had lively conversations on the subject that evening. Josh and I are both members of the RNC and share an intense concern about our election integrity across the country. Good afternoon, Josh.
Thank you so much for having me, Gina. And I also want to say how much I appreciate you and some of your fellow folks from Louisiana coming to Georgia, campaigning out in Fayette County. We sure do appreciate that. And I know a lot of NFRW members are coming to Georgia as well. So let me just say thank you so much for helping us hit these voter contacts that we really need to do between now and November 5th.
Well, you know, we're coming back. I went
Yes,
for a few days and then I'm coming back next Sunday and I'll be there through the 31st. But Josh, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. We know as chairman of the party, you are busy all the time, but I know we've been reading all of the members and people across the country, public officials, election rights groups, election officials, as well as the Republicans across the country who are watching you and your state of Georgia and the courts and how they're going to resolve the challenges to the new State Board of Election rules that were recently passed. The recent loss on these rules came from Judge Thomas Cox, I believe. He ruled that what I found interesting was that he ruled the 3 new board members broke the law by assuming powers that he says are reserved for the Georgia General Assembly. And I believe a former state legislator and another election board member brought that lawsuit.
That is correct.
Okay, obviously we're all fascinated with this and we remember all of the problems. It's uncanny, isn't it, that they're saying that it's too late for us to do these when we know so many states changed their election laws, rules, etc. within just a couple of weeks, I believe. One of them was Pennsylvania, I know, and then there were others. So what I would like for you to do, and I think all the members watching us are very interested in, it's what are those 7 new rules? And why do you not agree with the judge ruling if that's the case, which I assume it is the case. So I'm just going to let you're the one that has all the knowledge on this. And since we're very interested in it, I'm going to try not to interrupt you. I would just like for you to expound on those 7 new rules and give us any information as to where it stands now and what your aspirations are with appeals, etc.
Sure. Let me spend just a minute or two kind of setting the stage to get up to the adoption of the rules and the litigation around that. So the legislature in Georgia many years ago created a state elections board, and the purpose of that board is to instruct our counties on the conduct of elections. I know every state does this a little bit differently. In Georgia, the Secretary of State, while one of his responsibilities is elections administration, the elections are really run at the county level. So we have 159 counties in Georgia that are each running that elections process. They ultimately send their results to the secretary through our process of certifying an election. So the state elections board is composed of 5 members. There's a chairman who's appointed by the governor. Each one of the political parties gets to make an appointment. Our state House of Representatives gets to make an appointment, and our state Senate gets to make an appointment. And historically, the board, was like a lot of things around elections administration, did not receive that much attention. And then, of course, we had the 2020 election. One of the things that happened in 2020, it's not the only thing, but I think it'll give your members some understanding of why we are so surprised at the judicial decision from Judge Cox. In 2020, the state elections board met and they adopted an emergency rule to authorize the use of something called ballot drop boxes. We had never had ballot drop boxes in Georgia before. In fact, state law said there were two ways to cast an absentee ballot. You could either complete it and put it in the mail to your elections office, or you could physically take it to your county elections office and deposit it there. Those were your two options. There was nothing in the law that contemplated some third method of casting those votes. And the state elections board met. They met on an emergency basis with very little notice to the public or the legislature. And they adopted this rule that authorized counties to designate drop boxes, just these kind of like postal boxes where you could put in your absentee ballot. There was no regulation on where these drop boxes were to be located, how many there were to be in a particular county, or even the ratio of where they should be located. So we found, particularly in metropolitan Atlanta in the 2020 election, there were many, many more drop boxes in areas with high concentrations of Democratic voters than in Republican leaning areas. So all of that happened in 2020. The absentee ballot by mail vote in Georgia was what put Joe Biden over the top in the certified result. Joe Biden lost election day voting in Georgia. Joe Biden lost early voting. We have 3 weeks of early voting that's going on right now. He lost those ballots, but he won the paper absentee by mail ballots by a margin of 395,000 votes. So there's a lot of, concern about that coming out of the 2020 election. So the legislature removed the Secretary of State from the state elections board. Up until that time, he chaired the state elections board. And then it was changed to where the governor appoints it, as I mentioned earlier, the two political parties, state house and state senate. But this rulemaking authority has been in place for a long time. And in 2020, when this happened, no one sued. No one claimed they went beyond their authority. Nobody said that what they were doing was illegal. And I think if you wanted to make the argument that they were ever legislating, that was certainly the time that they were substituting their own judgment for the state legislature. So let's fast forward from 2020 to really a year ago, 2023. I got elected chairman of the Georgia Republican Party, and we had what I refer to as a 4-to-1, see no evil, speak no evil, hear no evil majority on our state elections board. They were very uninterested in questions around election integrity, questions that your members and that I are very interested in how do we make the process better. And I think that's one of the things that's really missing from this discussion is they're very quick in the mainstream media or on the left to try to label people who say we can do better with elections administration as, conspiracy theorists. Sometimes they call them election deniers, because they want to shut down a rational dialogue around this process, right? I mean, what I think everybody wants is that at the end of an election, whether you're on the winning side or the losing side, you can look at that result and say, yep, that's the result. I'm confident in it. I can move on. Maybe I'm happy with the result. Maybe I'm disappointed with the result, but I'm not wondering, is this actually the correct result? So we passed through the help of the General Assembly, our governor, our lieutenant governor, Speaker of the House, a number of very good laws over the last 3 years that did a lot to tighten up elections administration in our state. It's one of the reasons that this year, as we go into 2024, we have had fewer than 300,000 absentee ballots by mail requested. This time 4 years ago, we had already had 1.4 million of those ballots requested. So there's been a lot of good changes in our statutes through the legislature. But obviously, no matter how well crafted or thought out laws are, there are inevitably gaps or misinterpretation from those that are charged with carrying out the law. And I'll give you one example by way of talking about one of these rules that's being litigated. In 2020, we had a real problem with poll watchers. These are people that we appoint to review what's happening not only in the precinct during early voting or on election day, but more importantly, at the central, what we call the central tabulation center. So the election is over, the voting part of the election is over, and now all of the information, all of the votes are being taken to a central location in the county to be counted. And in Fulton County, particularly, that's Atlanta, Georgia, there were real problems with elections officials stopping our poll watchers from being able to meaningfully observe what was happening during the election, during the counting process. And so one of the rules that was adopted was to say anywhere in that tabulation center where ballots are being processed, our poll watchers shall have access. Well, that's simply an instruction to make sure that the laws that are already on the books are carried out. We have laws that say we can appoint poll watchers, that poll watchers are supposed to be able to meaningfully observe the process. Well, if I tell you I'm going to go count votes over in this part of the building, but you can't come with me, then you can't meaningfully observe the election, right? So that's one of the rules that was adopted, was to say we're going to make sure, and not just Republicans, that's the other theme of this conversation really, is that these rules are not designed to gain some sort of partisan advantage. These rules are designed to either put checks and balances on the process or to put more eyes on the process, to make it more transparent, with the ultimate goal being that more of our people are confident in the outcome of the election, whatever it is. Another one of the rules that has had some discussion around it has to do with our early voting. So we have 3 weeks of early voting. At the end of every day of early voting, a report gets run. The report doesn't tell us how many votes there are for Donald Trump or how many votes there are for Kamala Harris, but what it does tell us is how many people voted. You know, what precincts are they from? There's other really helpful information there that from a not just Republican Party, but Democratic Party perspective, it's helpful to know where the votes are coming from, because that's going to, you know, guide your efforts. When you come back to Georgia, I don't want you going walking neighborhoods where almost every person on the street has already voted, right? So that data is important. So we have a rule that says that data should be reported out by the counties every day, not aggregated at the Secretary of State, where we may not get some of that other information we need, but reported out on every county's website on a daily basis. Now, the rule that has probably garnered the most conversation is this rule regarding certification, and it's been widely misunderstood. In Georgia, we have a process. Of course, we have election night on that Tuesday, and then there's a state mandated deadline by which counties have to meet and certify the result of the election. And going back as far as January, we had election board members, local election board members, who were receiving threatening letters from Democrat lawyers saying, if you vote no on certification, or if you even ask questions or ask for information from elections officials, we're going to sue you. I mean, there were very specific individual threats to our Republican volunteers. And so we have tried in a number of different ways to answer this question of what is the role of that local elections board member from election night to the certification deadline. Is certification, I think you and I hear that word, I know when I hear it, I think that means it's like a good housekeeping seal of approval, like this is good, this was all done properly. What Judge McBurney and Judge Cox have both said is no, that's not what it means. It just means that they have received the result. So even if I've got video of somebody stuffing a ballot box or doing something else illegal, I'm bound as an elections board member to vote to certify that election. I can give, instructions or whatever, but I can't vote no under any circumstance. I'm basically a rubber stamp. The other controversy, and this is where we were successful in litigation around this rule, was the question of whether or not an elections board member can even request information during this period. And Judge McBurney ruled unequivocally that elections officials cannot stonewall. They've got to answer questions from our election board members. They've got to furnish information, whether that's ballot images, tally sheets, whatever they're looking for, they're entitled to that information. And that was an open question until about 10 days ago. So that's a big win for us as we enter into this process of going in to the election. Another one of the rules that has garnered a lot of discussion is the so-called hand count rule. Now, the hand count rule, and this requires just a little bit of explanation, but the hand count rule says that on election night, in Georgia, we have these electronic voting machines. You mark your choices on a screen. It then prints a ballot, and that ballot contains your choices, which you can visually inspect. And then you place that ballot into a scanner. So your ballot is scanned, but the physical copy of that ballot is retained in the ballot box. So the purpose of this rule was to say it's 7 p.m., polls are closed, we run all of the machines in a precinct, and we discover, okay, there are 2,000 votes were cast today at my precinct, Bolton Academy in Atlanta. What this rule would say is, okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to remove the physical ballots, and we're going to make sure there are 2,000 ballots in the ballot box, right? It's like reconciling your checkbook. You know, there's been a lot of confusion around this. A lot of media people have tried to make it sound like we're going to tally the votes for each race. That's not what we're talking about. All we're talking about is physically counting to make sure that the number of ballots matches up with the number of votes the machine is reporting as being cast. Another rule that's similar to that is a rule that says we're going to take that total number on the machine and we're going to check it against the number of voters that checked in with what we call our poll book. So when you go in and you sign that elector's oath, yes, I live at this address, yes, I'm over 18, that number, we want to make sure that number equals the number on the machine. That's it. So those to me are the really, I'd say the big five, the ones that really, you know, are where all the tension is around. So what we had happen are a number of different groups, including the gentleman you mentioned, sued. And so we have 3 cases that really deal with this issue of, in his case, the most recent one was asking the question, does the state elections board even have the authority to issue rules? And what Judge Cox said is everything that I just described to you was like passing a law in the legislature as opposed to simply giving an instruction to the local boards of election. I will tell you, Judge Cox issued this 11-page ruling within 30 minutes of the hearing being over. And so I don't know how else to say it, but I feel like he was prejudiced before we even walked into the courtroom. I don't think he gave us a fair shake. I think it's really unfortunate because when these sorts of things happen, it's just one more black eye for a system that has had a lot of reputational damage over the last 4 years in terms of our judicial branch of government here in Georgia. So we filed an appeal. We filed an appeal almost immediately. The Georgia Court of Appeals has agreed to hear this on an expedited basis. We are hoping that the Court of Appeals will reverse Judge Cox and allow these rules to move forward. This decision is really problematic for 2 reasons. One reason is we'd like to see these rules enforced, obviously. We think they're common sense measures that improve public confidence in elections. But what we're equally concerned about is the ability of the board to do this going forward, right? Because we think that that's an important part of elections administration in our state. And so we're going to continue to fight for that regardless of the outcome of the court decision. But what I do want your members to know, whether this lawsuit is ultimately successful or whether we're able to went on appeal and have it thrown out. The legal environment in Georgia is radically different from what it was in 2020. For example, I started our conversation about ballot drop boxes. In 2020, they could be scattered pell-mell all over the state. In 2024, actually going back to 2022, they can only be put in government buildings. They can't be accessed 24 hours a day. There are a lot of security measures around the ballot drop boxes. Now, my personal preference would be we just do away with them altogether, but they are much more secure than they were 4 years ago. There are a lot of additional identity verification measures that weren't present, 4 years ago. And that's why I think partially the number of paper absentee ballots are down 80% versus the election 4 years ago. We have more poll watchers than we've ever had. I've been involved in Georgia elections really continuously the last 2 decades. We've never had this many poll watchers. We've never booked this many poll watching shifts, including a lot of that 3-week period of early voting. We've got more lawyers than we've ever had before. We have tremendous litigation support from the Republican National Committee. I think we're just talking about state elections board litigation today, but I think we're involved in 24, 25 separate lawsuits right now in state or federal court. So we're awake, we're paying attention. And I will say over the last week of early voting, yes, there have been a few irregularities reported, nothing like what we saw in 2020. Of course, we're running those down aggressively as they get reported in. We've got a hotline that's live. We've got a web portal that's live for our people to immediately transmit their complaints as they happen or things that they see that they want investigated. So I don't want to leave everybody with a bad taste in their mouth. Yes, we've got to litigate these issues around these rules, and we hope we're going to be successful. But regardless of that, we do have a much better environment this year than we did 4 years ago. And I know I've gone on for quite some time, so I'm going to pause there and see if I've prompted
No, I wanted you to go on, and I'm really glad that I asked you to. I just want to ask you about the drop boxes. I read and was told that somewhere, and I'm not sure it was Georgia, that you're not even allowed to put a video, a camera, or to make a video or record people that come to put their ballot in those drop boxes, which I think is absurd. You need to know what's going on with those boxes.
Yeah, so most of the drop boxes, I won't say all because I couldn't swear to that, but most of the drop boxes are in government buildings, and they're in government buildings where surveillance cameras are present. So it's not that there aren't any eyes on it. It's more about a question of, can I camp out at a drop, excuse me, can I camp out at a drop box with my cell phone camera, recording people as they come by? I think that we have come a long, long way with regard to the security around the drop boxes. I do think that was an issue in 2020 that needed to get resolved. The legislature took very dramatic action to address it. And so, we're less concerned at this point. Obviously, we're watching it closely, excuse me, but, just the volume of ballots has been so far reduced. We're very focused now as we're entering the second week of early voting on physically being present in as many of those early voting locations and making sure that our photo ID law is being followed and the other laws that are on the books are being followed. Because obviously you can have the best election laws in the country, but if they're not being enforced and there's not somebody there to watch to make sure they're being followed, they don't do you very much good. So, we feel good about how things have gone in the early voting locations for the most part. We are aggressively running down those issues as they get reported back to us. And of course, we're fighting these battles in court, not just on the election board rules, but there are some of these laws that the legislature passed, Democrats have tried to have overturned. And really the good news report on litigation is all of those challenges have been dismissed. We have been able to fight off every attempt to weaken our election integrity laws this cycle.
Well, that's why I was surprised, frankly, because I thought even when I was in Georgia and I was driving around, I could hear the news and people being interviewed, and I thought they had been cast aside or thrown out a number of times and felt very hopeful about everything. Did they give you any idea as to when the emergency appeal may be heard?
So we had some very specific instructions. We had to file, I know we're recording this on October the 21st. We had to file our brief in support of our appeal yesterday, Sunday, October 20th. The state representative you mentioned who brought this lawsuit, his legal team had to file their response at noon today. So the court now has all the briefs. And so hopefully we'll rule very quickly and hopefully in our favor. That's what we're looking for.
You feel pretty secure. You feel pretty secure about I know that the RNC is there with you.
Yes. And if I didn't say it before, yes, the Republican National Committee intervened in this case with us. They are joining us in the appeal. The one thing I'll say from my experience here in Georgia, Chairman Whatley, Co-Chair Trump, anytime we have needed anything this year with regard to legal support, they have been there and they have been there right away. If I've said, hey, I need to appeal this case, the feedback was instant. So yeah, so the RNC's in this, we're in it. We're now waiting on a decision is where we are. And I would expect that decision to come sometime this week.
Well, I think that gives us an indication that we do have more hope this time than we did the last time, because we are more prepared for that. And I want to thank you so much for coming and talking with us. It went exactly the way I thought it would. It's such an interesting topic, and you're so knowledgeable of it, and I knew you would be. But I hope and pray that you will be successful, first of all, because we are on the right side of this. Obviously, we need to be able to count things. But I hope you'll come back after the election and we can rehash this maybe and go over some things we talked about, and then talk about the end result of and how far we've come along, hopefully to the positive side of all of this. And I'm looking forward to seeing you. I guess January, we will have our RNC meeting. And I hope to see you maybe possibly while we are in Georgia. But if there's anything that you think that we should know, please let me know. I know we text periodically, but let me know, because I know the ladies are very interested in this.
Well, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you and to talk about this. And I would love to come back and kind of do a how did we do kind of conversation. And as you said, I feel cautiously optimistic. I think we're going to have a positive report to give when we have that conversation. And I look forward to seeing you hopefully while you're in Georgia, but if not, certainly when we're together again.
I hope so. I love that state. That's why I keep telling them, no, I'm going to go back to Georgia. Thank you, Josh. We appreciate your time so much. I know you're busy.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.